I've been working for a number of years with ACA families and their kids and taking a real close look at the kind of communication patterns that go on in those families and why. Also, I'm going to talk to you about how I intervene in those patterns and what I do with them.
Can you do me a favor, though?
Yes.
Define an ACA family? You mean?
Families in which there is at least one ACA parent. Okay, that's what I'm working with. Families in which we have an ACA parent or two sort of confounds the pattern a little bit. I want to talk about the themes I see in those families first. I think they're important themes because the families are constructed around those themes. I think the most important thing is safety. The families are constructed around the tremendous need on the parents' part for safety and the avoidance of intimacy. So you get families that may be pleasant but are seldom intimate. They are usually lacking any significant amount of important intimate information about each other and have real difficulty sharing any kind of truly intimate feeling with one another. Both husband to wife, sibling to sibling, sibling to either of the parents. Particularly intimate feelings that are at the unpleasant end of the scale. So feelings of disappointment, discouragement, confusion, inability, lack of self-confidence, etc. The third theme I find in the families that's a real important one is a theme of control. The families are tightly controlled. Communication is usually controlled through the ACA parent, who is intimately and instrumentally involved in the design of unconscious rules about communication in the family. So that in a family, for instance, where the ACA mother is in control, you'll find her the person who sets limits about what can be discussed and not discussed in the family. And you get those families in treatment. How many people here are clinicians who treat families? Good. When those families walk in the door, right away you're going to get a good sense about, one, who's in control and what the rules are about what can be discussed and what can't be discussed. And I got to tell you, most often, intimate sharing works through the mother, and she will stop it time after time after time with a couple of different kinds of distraction techniques that I'll talk about. Usually, the other parent, if they're not an ACA, colludes. They collude because the dynamics of their own family of origin make the collusion very attractive psychologically for them. They're hiding out. They need the ACA's control. They need the ACA's structure. They also need the avoidance of intimacy that goes on in these families. So very often, there's a very good always, there's an excellent psychological partnership going on. The children are taught very early to collude with the parents. And so the ACA parent becomes the focal point of decision-making about what is allowed to be discussed and what is not allowed to be discussed. Pervasive throughout the entire system is a sense of distrust that can be projected out onto other agencies, onto other people, onto the schools, onto a particular family member, onto grandparents, onto somebody. But there'll always be a core of mistrust, even if the people look very pleasant on the surface. And in fact, they will present in that kind of way. The mistrust is inherent in the system. You may find the ACA parent willing to admit the mistrust or in real denial about mistrust. in terms of affirming the sense that they trust other family members and they like their parents, and what you have is a kind of idealized picture of what went on. Or you have the mistrust projected out very frequently, but there is essentially a mistrust between all the family members. Okay? You may find that to conceal that, there is a tremendous demand for total trust and approval in the family, so that family members who commit minor errors in judgment are called on the carpet immediately. Lying is such a big to-do in the family. Did you tell the truth? Can I trust you? No, I can't. And very often the ACA parent will demonstrate tremendous disappointment that they can no longer trust this youngster. And very often you get 5, 6, 7-year-old youngsters who are fantasizing. They need information about what's the truth and what's not the truth. And these families are not very good about deciding what is truth and not truth anyhow. But if the child is caught, the whole sense of mistrust escalates tremendously. And there's a real black and whiteness in the families about the whole issue of trust. An excessive concern for the issue of trust, well beyond what we would normally expect in a family. The communication subtly or more dramatically cues for the avoidance of feelings on a regular basis, so that the feeling content of comments between family members is negated, distracted from. Anything to allow family members to stay with or on a feeling for any appreciable amount of time. And real early on in the treatment process, you'll see that various family members have been trained with a role to distract from the feeling content taking place, so that if you have tension between father and mother, you might have a hysterical 16-year-old who constantly acts out in the sessions to distract from the tension between mom and dad. So what you'll begin to find early on in the sessions is there'll be something that steers you away, that cues the family away regularly from, one, noticing that something with emotional content is taking place, and secondly, focusing on it, and thirdly, feeling anything, even if the family will begin to notice. And very often in ACA families, you'll get a sense that people want to work. They really want to get this better, okay? But what they don't want to do is feel the pain first. They don't want to do that. They want to think about a solution, and they want to talk about their ideas about how to get better, but they don't want to feel much. That's to be avoided at all costs. So what you'll find in the family is a subtlety of cueing that's really finely tuned to avoid intimate contact and feeling, particularly feelings that might make people closer to each other, whether they're angry feelings, feelings of love, etc. What I find is more frequently and more commonly there and allowed are feelings of frustration, annoyance, irritation. That's allowed. What you'll also find in the communication patterns, which are particularly disturbing, is when you begin to ask the family what individual members need, there'll be distraction. There is very little discussion of what people need and how they ought to go about getting it. I think it's real important early on in sessions with one or more ACA parent to begin to ask the family early on, what do you need from the session today? What do you want to get out of it? How do you feel about the session? let's stop. I'm really wondering what John's feeling in the session right now. Let's take a look. What do you think he's feeling? Because I got to tell you something. The distraction's gone on so long in these families, they're not very good at reading that information. So there's a lot of misreading, misinterpretation, and miscuing going on. So if I'm looking in the information, in the environment for a cue about how you are, and I'm used to being distracted over here when something's going on with you, I've not picked up the skill of tuning into what's going on, asking you what you need, and correcting the situation. That whole sequence doesn't occur. Some other things occur instead, but that doesn't occur. Okay? So you find that people don't have a very good sense about reading other people, checking it out, and doing something to correct an emptiness. Instead, what you will find is tremendous enmeshment, hypersensitivity to cues, and overreaction, and reaction's the word, overreaction, and immediate either placation, diffusing, or distracting from the real content. And no one is very aware that's going on. The other pattern that you might see with the ACA parent is disengagement from the family process. So you either have enmeshment or disengagement. And I find with a lot of ACA fathers that it's so painful to be around some family members. They're so hyper alert to cues of pain in other family members that being in the family is uncomfortable enough that they'll become workaholics, community service-aholics. They'll be around all kinds of other people in situations that don't demand much emotional content. They'll do good for lots of people, but they won't get close. And their own family oftentimes starves and hurts as a result of that. And they can't be faulted. They're lovely people. When they have good community, they have high standards, they have good sense of morals and ethics, they're in the community, and they detach themselves from their family and are quite disengaged from the actual day-to-day parenting of their children. Okay? So I find oftentimes that the mothers become enmeshed and the fathers get disengaged, and that there are differences in that, but I see a lot of both of those kinds of situations going on. In any case, you'll find parents that are often over-responsible for their youngsters' day-to-day activities. I don't mean they're really involved, I mean they're over-responsible. I have situations now, a number of families whose youngsters just went into college, and all the way through June, through the middle of last year, we had parents who were writing their kids' letters to various colleges, filling out their applications, taking charge of their lives on a complete basis, whether or not the youngster needed this, wanted this, etc. But the youngsters are very early trained to not be able. They get the message that that's what they're going to get from these parents, and that on some level, their collusion in the system involves playing helpless, playing in trouble. Yes.
Do they also lose the ability to do so in the process of never?
Of course. We train our children young. If we train them to be disabled young, they become disabled, and then of course we in fact have exactly what we need, which is someone to take care of, so that we don't have to take a look at what we need. And that becomes real dangerous, because when you get people who can't take care of themselves, there's a lot of pain, and they want to medicate their pain. You've got the whole cycle all over again. So basically what we're talking about is families that early on cue their children not to notice what's going on emotionally, or to distract from it in some kind of ritualized way. You may have an acting out 8 or 9 or 10 or 15-year-old who acts out every time something emotional goes on in that family that the family can't tolerate. And the kid gets that role, and he gets noticed, and he gets to be what the family takes care of instead of themselves. Okay? Or you get a extremely compliant, sweet, placating, healing youngster who will do exactly what they're supposed to do all the time and make it okay with other family members. Dilute the emotional content. Or you get a real cognitive, heady kid, and the family has all kinds of discussions about ideas, but is mostly avoiding feeling contact with each other. Okay? And real often, the families are real good at putting on a facade of warmth and caring, so that the family is indeed, on the surface, close and connected, but there's not much feeling connection to one another. Do you understand the difference, the distinction that I'm making? Okay.
Yes.
Good. The over-responsible thing is real important because you've got, with the ACA parent, and usually with the cooperation with the other parent, a kind of compulsive attention to taking care of the physical needs of the family. Okay. Lots of attention to physical needs. Lots of attention to physical detail in the house. So you have households that may work flawlessly. Okay? You've got children who never lack for any of their physical needs. Okay? And you can just fantasize that may be out of guilt that the parents have about not doing whatever else they'd like to do. It may be that these parents are making up to kids for backgrounds that were so horrendous that the idea of structuring order in their own environments is essential to them. And we're back to that whole idea of safety. Safety is the first and foremost dynamic that's taking place. And these families on the surface look very safe. Safe enough to be dangerous, if you know what I'm talking about. Okay. Part of the reason. Any questions about what I said so far? Yeah.
You say safe from what?
Safe from the kind of danger these folks experience in alcoholic households. Safe from emotional content run rampant. Safe from physical abuse. Safe from physically abusing relationship. Safe from rage out of control. Safe from intimacy and then rejection. Safe from all the kinds of things that go on in households where substance abuse is a real problem. Okay? Unfortunately, then the baby gets thrown out with the bathwater on some level. Okay? What I also notice in these families is that there's difficulty with boundaries. Boundaries between generations, boundaries between subsystems in the family, and individual boundaries. Very often, like when you have the enmeshed mother or the disengaged father, there is either very little ability on the part of one of the parents to separate themselves from their kids, or they are so separate that there's not much reasonable dialogue between them, or the parents were raised in such abusive environments, they don't have much of a sense of their own boundaries. They are always reacting to what's going on around them. They have very little ability to reality test what goes on and decide about a reaction, decide with how they want to deal with the situation. They are most often in emotional reaction. Okay? And what's interesting is they will not look like that. They'll look pretty well defended on the surface, and they're coping pretty well. And indeed, they'll often be a real hysterical feeling inside of themselves and be coping in a real defended way against that. Okay? I also begin to look at family rituals that really involve demand for compliance, a demand an over-involvement of youngsters in family life so that the youngsters don't have very much freedom to be on their own. And a hyper concern for responsibilities dealt with well. So you get families in which there are lots of rules and checklists and things that must be accomplished, so that the children are also subject to the parent's sense of over-responsibility. In a lot of these houses, there is a lot of chore activity, required attendance at certain family functions, things that children must do repeatedly, checking of how beds are made, checking of how this is done, checking of how that is done. And you get kids that come into therapy pretty angry about being hyper-controlled. Okay? Some of the families will covertly support acting out on the kid's part, only so they can clean up the mess. And some families will be horrified by kids being out of control and wonder what this symptom means. What have they done wrong? What we begin to know about any family is what the family disowns, its children act out. What the family disowns, its children act out.
Can you answer that?
Yeah. Yeah, oh, absolutely. Whatever, this is also an individual function, but it's certainly a family function. Whatever the family cannot really address overtly must be addressed unconsciously and covertly. So what begins to happen is families that cannot live with the idea that they have some of their own mess or their own disorder or their own emotional chaos create what they most dread, which is chaos, etc. And the symptomatology in youngsters is very often reflective. It's a key to you about what is not being addressed in the family. And of course, ACA families dread symptomatic youngsters. They can't stand to see signs of dysfunction. Families are created to keep order. So you don't want to see anything wrong, particularly, God forbid. Because wrong means you're not a good person, wrong means they're going to drink, wrong means all kinds of things. You failed as a parent, there's something wrong with what's going on here. And we all know that you can't have a family with kids and not have something go wrong. Okay? I like to check every ACA family that comes in for obsessive-compulsive, at least features in some family member. It's a situation rife for obsessions and compulsions. And somehow those are celebrated and validated and enjoyed. They're perfect ways to avoid feelings, aren't they? And you also get a clean house. It's perfect. Okay, so you got families that are scared of dirt. They're scared of chaos. They're scared of disorder. They're scared of trouble. They're scared of a lot of human functions. And in the real honest desire to protect themselves from the chaos of their childhoods, they create situations in which chaos is the only legitimate response to oppression. On their own parts and on their children's part. So when their partners start acting out, having affairs or leaving businesses or whatever it is, they can't understand what that's about. And very often when we look at the rule systems in these families, you can't breathe. So real early in treatment with these families, I like to help the family take a look at how the rules are working. And we can assume off the get-go that when you've got symptomatic kids, the rules aren't working. The rules need examination, and that's okay. One of my first tasks with ACA families is to let them know it's okay that symptoms don't mean they're bad people. Symptoms mean something that was functional once is no longer very functional. And dysfunctional now doesn't mean drop down drunk 3 weeks from now. It just means symptoms now. And it's time to look. And so early on, I like to get the families to be willing to look because they're so unwilling to see. They're so terrified they're going to see signs of imminent disaster that they're afraid to look. So part of your task as clinicians and as people making an intervention is to make it okay to look. And so real early on, you're going to handle reframes of symptomatology in a very gentle kind of way. We also know that people come and go out of families. There are exits and entrances. Kids go to school. People go to work. They change jobs. They die. And exits and entrances and changes in the family life cycle are very threatening for ACAs. They like things to run like Swiss trains. And when they don't, they get very upset and they think they must be doing something wrong. Or they want the symptom to go away. So very often when an ACA family will come into you, it's because of a fairly normal developmental crisis. The kids are going to school. Their real compliant latency age kid is going into puberty. Their later adolescent is going off to college. And a whole group of new families come in when kids were leaving prep school and going into college, and all of a sudden you had all these families in chaos. They're leaving home, and the family was terrified. So whenever the homeostatic balance is upset in these families, you're going to see terror. Not just fear, terror. Okay? Everything's sort of dramatized, for good reason. You come out of an environment where terror is taking place nightly. You respond to your cues in a very intense way, and you don't show much. The other interesting thing, which is on the opposite side of this, is when I take histories with ACAs, they tell me nightmare stories like they're describing how to make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And I listen to them, and now this abuse happened, and that molest happened, and this happened, and that happened. And it doesn't even register anymore. They're so numb to it. However, in their own environment, what you pick up from them is a hyper-alertness to cues of danger. Hyper-alertness and instantaneous responses on some level, which are usually reactions, and are subtle and mostly unconscious by this time, automatic in families. And for all of us, I like to reality test what's going on. You know what I'm saying? And I came from an abusive household myself. My parents were not alcoholics, but they were certainly abusive. And what I began to realize as a parent myself was that any time anybody might be hurting my kid, I was going to intervene like that. Take care of it. I'll protect him, right? The problem is that he didn't learn to protect himself. And secondly, my hyper-alertness to the cues didn't give me an opportunity to really evaluate or help him evaluate whether there was actual danger that had to be responded to. So part of the task early on is watching how the family responds and helping them have some stop time to evaluate whether or not there's truly danger there or they're only reliving a childhood experience. And I got to tell you, very often they don't know the difference. And when they start to, it's amazing to watch real enmeshed or disengaged parents. I stop them and I say, what do you think's going on with him? Because they don't know. I mean, they've gone off in fantasy land somewhere and they've already taken care of it. I bring them back to right now and have them check it out. And not at all what they thought is going on. They don't have to do what they thought they were going to do. In fact, everybody is grateful they're not going to do it.
Is that also part of that all or none thinking too?
It's part of the all or none thinking. It's part of the real dramatic response masked with, I cope fine. So inside you got hysteria and outside you got excessive control. Terrible combination because you don't look like you're hysterical. You just, if you look at behavior over a long period of time, you just act like you're hysterical. Okay? One of the things you got working with you real early is usually an over-reliance on the intellectual function. So you got people who are okay cognitively, okay? They're not really because it's a defense, but at least you have a channel in. So early on, they're real good about learning about new communication patterns, and they want to try stuff on. I think initially it's a defense against getting into treatment, but it's a start. And you can prescribe tasks for them that they're real happy to, they're very compliant usually on the surface. It's usually a flight to health as far as I'm concerned, but they are at least willing to comply on the surface, and you give them some family tasks like, I just want you to spend some time, and when you sit with your son doing homework, I just want you to listen to what he has to say, and I want you to do nothing. Okay, or if I'm going to give him a paradoxical task, I'll sit down and I'll say, I just want you to sit down with your son and tell him what to do the entire time you're sitting with homework, which of course they'll never do. But I want them to have some new experiences with communication early on. And early on what will happen is they'll come in with pretty startling awarenesses because they're very good monitors. They're busy scanning the environment. Their scanning skills are wonderful. So I make use of those monitoring skills in a healthy way. I want them to start to look. What are you seeing? What is taking place? What did you watch? Is John really unable to take care of himself? Is he really as out of control as you're seeing? Did you watch him? What did you see? I even ask them to take notes because they love taking copious notes. But I'm sure there's a number of ACAs in the room who are just writing every word down. Okay. I hope I can tease you. Okay. And what they begin to watch is they can now watch reality in the same way they were scanning for 1937. Because most of them are living in that terrifying year when they stopped looking very closely at what was going on. They're not here. They're busy protecting themselves from being here. They're busy making sure that the horror doesn't recapitulate, so that basically you're going to train people to start being here a little bit and watching and reality testing their perceptions. And that's cognitive. I mean, of course there are feelings behind it, but initially what you're doing is looking for data. And so really early on I say, gee, I just want to make sure that all the trouble you're going to is reasonable. Reasonable is a good word. That you're actually seeing what you think you're seeing. So I just want you to look closely. And I train them in observation for several weeks, all the family members, and ask them to look at certain kinds of things. Observation creates distance, and once you've created some distance, people begin to have some perspective on what's going on. It almost always begins to yield feelings and the sense that they haven't been here. And once you get that, the sense that you haven't been here, you've got people interested and engaged. Very often then, symptomatology can lift pretty quickly. And the problem with that is ACAs are real task-oriented, so that once you lift symptomatology for them, a lot of them want to, things are clean again. I don't ever want to give them symptom relief too quickly, because symptom relief says, oh, the pain's gone, there's nothing else to do. If that's so, if I get a family who I know is coming in only for that, I want to seed their consciousness with the sense that something else might be able to go on here. Some ways about doing that. I find with real high-functioning families, and I've been privileged to get some very bright families in treatment recently, family histories are wonderful ways to start because everyone knows there's some awful family secret, or secrets, mostly secrets in these families, and that they mostly haven't been talked about. They've mostly been defended against. Very often, the symptomatic youngsters, once they get the story, aren't real interested in holding symptoms. The symptoms fall away pretty quickly. And once the enmeshment or disengagement shifts, and it can shift pretty quickly in these families, there's no longer a structural need for the symptoms. What you then are facing is the ACA and his or her partner in crisis about their relationship, and very often you're going to be doing marital counseling. Okay? Once the family gets the idea, you usually have a marriage set up in terms of the avoidance of intimacy, and the children have often been used as a wedge in that process. There's usually real difficulty with these parents separating marital from parental relationships. They can be good parents, but they're not very good marriage partners. I have not seen many truly satisfying marriages in which there's a lot of emotional content, significant sexuality, all kinds of other things. They are cooperative parents. They may be pals. There's not a lot of intimacy. So basically what we're starting with is a relationship built around the avoidance of terror. And there's always collusion in that couple. There's always collusion. And when they come in, there's been an over-focus on kids' needs, an over-focus on the wife's needs or the husband's needs, the creation of a family cripple or a family problem. All of those distraction strategies from taking a look at the real issue, which is, I suppose, emptiness individually and maritally. And a sense that something's terribly wrong and no place to go with that. Some other families I've seen are real hysteria creating. They love to create crisis. There's a lot of drama in some of these families. And what you get is there's always something terribly wrong. Terribly wrong. Except nothing's terribly wrong. I finished treatment with a family who was seeing for about maybe 15 months. Both parents were ACAs. And they came initially to talk as parents about their kids, but did not want to bring their children in. It's interesting. Mm-hmm. And so I said, I must see the kids in the first 3 sessions or I won't see you. They waited to the 3rd session. They had described what sounded like a paranoid schizophrenic son, which I really doubted, but I waited to see. And this relatively normal 17-year-old walked in. And the mother called me after the session and said, does he need to be hospitalized? And I said to her, no. She said, oh my God, what are we going to do with him then? I said, I got to tell you something. Your son looks like a pretty normal 17-year-old to me. Spoke his mind, going to school, has relationships, plays, enjoys himself, going to work, cooperates in the family. He's just angry at you. It's a risk because they're usually going to walk at that point. And I figured either we were going to engage around what their misperceptions were, or we weren't going to engage at all. 15 months later, this boy's now off in school, and mom and dad are renegotiating their relationship, and mom has gone to go through hell reliving the crisis of her childhood, which was 2 brutalizing, child-molesting, alcoholic parents. And somehow, mom had projected all of her terror and fear of insanity onto this youngster who was perfectly functional, willing to act in the family in some bizarre ways so that mom and dad had taken this boy to numerous places to get help for all kinds of things. But he finally saw me and he said, what are you going to do to me? I said, I don't know, what's the matter with you? He said, I don't think anything. I'm just being sick of being dragged around. And if you're really afraid you're crippled yourself, or you know you are, and you don't want to look at that, what do? You project it out on somebody else. Preferably a youngster whose crippledness you can take care of, and take care of the feelings you have all about that. Until what you get real aware of is the crippledness is yours. The fear of it's yours. And I guess we have to assess the ability of our clients to take a look at that and see what they're going to do with it. But basically what you're going to see underneath is that terror and the family's desire to project it, to project the chaos out, to project the messiness out, to project the emotional violence out, to project the inappropriate sexuality out, to project their fear of substance abuse out, all of that. It's projected out. Something else which is real interesting to me, vulnerability is really to be avoided. That's the lesson. Vulnerability is to be avoided. Now, there's a lot of ways I can deal with that. I can create a whole conglomerate of relatively disengaged individuals who don't need to be vulnerable to anybody. I can create several independent, strong, high-functioning, over-responsible family members and a cripple that we all have to take care of. We can all act like we need nothing and take care of a lot of other people on the outside. We can do lots of good work in the community and have a family that never gets together. Okay? There are lots of ways to avoid vulnerability because vulnerability is terrifying. So my sense is excessive caretaking, hyper-responsibility, do-goodism are all ways essentially of projecting vulnerability out. Take a long look at how the family projects their vulnerability out, how they avoid their vulnerabilities. I had just a real high-functioning, courageous client leave therapy recently. Again, ACA with 2 alcoholic, child molesting, abusing parents who was a very high-functioning business executive, very disengaged from his family, very cut off from his feelings, came in because one of his friends was an ACA and was getting better and doing better in business than he was, and he wanted to find out why he wasn't doing so well in his business anymore. Well, we explored what not doing so well meant, and not doing so well meant he was probably the highest paid person in his industry, and he couldn't understand why he wasn't a success. We took a good long look at what success and failure meant, and all we discovered was his terror of failure was so intense that no matter what he did obsessionally to avoid failure, it was never enough. He came in one day with a check, and he said, I had a check for well over $1 million in my hand, and I knew I'd failed. And I knew, you taught me to test it enough, that couldn't be a failure. He said, but all I knew was I felt little and frightened, and I knew I was big and successful. Something was really wrong. And this man had starved to death, nearly starved to death, when alcoholic parents woke up in the middle of the night, beat him up. He woke up for school in the morning. They put him in a taxi cab to nowhere with no food. And he never forgot being in a taxi cab with no food to nowhere and no money. So where was he going? He was going nowhere with no food, with lots of money. He kept saying to me, I don't understand. This is all working. This is a lovely family, and there's nothing here for me. I don't want to be here. And indeed, he hadn't been home for years. So what you find is real emotional poverty in the family masked with a superficial plenty, either financial plenty, attention plenty, but there really is a horror of deprivation. For good reason. The marital material began in earnest when this man bought his wife a lovely fur coat and a bunch of jewelry and stuff for Christmas, and she, instead of opening the boxes and enjoying them, took the things out of the boxes and threw all of it at him, much to the horror of the kids. And when she came in to talk about it, she said all she knew was that they were bribes. She knew they were bribes, and she didn't want them. And she knew that was crazy, and what did I think about that? And I said, it sounds pretty sane to me. That's why if you clean up the symptom too quickly, you don't get a chance to watch what that's about. In this particular family, which was real interesting, the boy, he's about 16, 17 years old, was real dysfunctional in school. Real bright kid, good intelligence, healthy, popular, and not real functional. Cared not at all for stuff. Wanted to hang out in his room and, read poetry and create art and play. His family didn't play, didn't do art, and did nothing but work. Both parents did nothing but achieve. It was interesting that the symptom that terrified them, this youngster, was a signal for where the family needed to look at health. Okay, that's sort of what I wanted to say, and I'm happy to take questions, reactions. Yeah.
Good stuff. I just had a question about the driving. You were saying about driving. I missed it.
Yeah. Very often, this is interesting. This man truly loved his children. He wasn't able to give them what he wanted to, but he certainly was able to give them the fruits of his labor. And in fact, they were bribes. He felt like when a holiday, or he said to me, I don't understand why when I shop for them, I never can find enough stuff. And what he would indeed do is, and all of his behavior was connected, because what he would do is he would buy so many things that he would get terrified over what he'd spent, have to work harder to do it, and the whole circle continued. That kept him away from home, kept him fighting with his wife, it kept him distant from his children, and it kept him angry at all of them because they were demanding too much from him. It kept him feeling guilty because he hadn't provided. It's perfect. It kept him also not taking a look at what he needed. So we had to take a look at one time when he was going to send one of the kids on some big fancy trip to Europe for no particular reason. I said, "Are you comfortable with this? This is $17,000. Do you want to do that?" And he said, "It never occurred to me I had a choice." And I guess what he got down to was his kids were never going to be in that taxi cab going nowhere, ever. No matter what it took, they weren't going to do that. So let me just sort of summarize some of the ideas, and then we'll just take general questions and reactions. The underpinning is always safety over chaos. The underpinning is always terror of intimacy and vulnerability. The underpinning is always mistrust, for good reason. And the icing on the cake can be all kinds of things. Over-responsibility, over-protection, heady avoidance of emotional contact. A lot of things that cover the core themes. And the important thing is to know that they're always there. And the task is, sort of like with remember pickup sticks? You're going to carefully take off the top stuff and make it okay for them to start to feel. Because basically, an ACA who's going to have a full emotional existence has to dance somewhere near that terror for a while. They have to sense that. And very often what I find is somewhere in the mid part of treatment, and I know it's going to come, you're going to get a sense of bleak depression. It's going to be a wipeout somewhere in there. They're going to go very low. And I know that's coming. If it comes, I know the person has the capacity to deeply heal. If it doesn't come, I know that maybe we'll do more patching and structural work and get them to be a better functioning family, but they will not be able to get to that juicy material that all of us hide when we've been beat up. Do carefully assess the fragility of the client and make very available enough support so that when they get close to that stuff, someone's there. Because no one was there. And the fewer people that were there, the greater the terror. This man called me over the holidays. It was on a ski trip. And he said, I got to tell you, everything is black. I said, that makes sense to me. He said, what do I do? I said, you need to feel some of it. And he said, I can't stand it. There's no one to hold me. There's no one to talk to. There's no one here. And by phone and by person, we walked through some of that. And there was another one of them. And usually when that partner finishes, the other partner must feel that too. And believe me, usually the partner will do everything to get in the way of that healing process. Because the partner is fighting for their own denial. And they'll do almost anything to avoid it. So he said to me, I can't believe it. She's been asking me to get close to her all these years. I finally break down, and she says to me, get your skis on and get outside. I said, she's terrified. He said, how can I get close to her? I don't want to touch her. I said, I don't blame you. Wait. And it wasn't long until she called me and said, I'm in this black hole. How do I get out of here? And then I know that they have the courage and the wherewithal to heal in the way that they need to. But as helpers, we need to know that place in ourselves and to not be terrified of that emptiness and to be willing to face it. Because if you can't, you shouldn't take them there. Don't do it. So a lot of therapists are real afraid of that material when it comes out. They want to give some kind of cognitive prescription to fix it. They want to give them some task to do to go home and complete it. You know what? You do that well enough, you get them right there. And then you have to do something. And then the whole thing changes. I was watching this family talk to each other as they left treatment. The son had had an auto accident. And right on his way to my office. His parents were there. And in the old days, it would have been, Mom could rush to his defense. Dad could punish him about money and then take care of him. And he could be disabled, dysfunctional. He came in and he said, my last attempt, huh? He said, I really think that I wanted you to take the car away from me. He said, I guess I'm too afraid to go away to school. And he got to say all this kind of stuff, and I thought to myself, all right. The father sat there, the mother sat there. She said, I'm really glad you're alive. I'm mad about the car because it's going to cost a lot of money to fix. I think you're going to have to fix it. The father went to jump in and caught himself. They all cried and held each other, and we knew we were just about finished because the whole dynamic was different. That the crisis, which could have been high opportunity for right back into it, wasn't. And everyone knew they hadn't. Everyone knew they hadn't early, and I knew I'd done my work and they'd done their work and we were finished, and that was fine. Okay. So, questions? Yeah.
I'm just wondering if both parents are in pain, is this pretty much the same pattern?
What you'll get, it's even harder to deal with because you may have two different patterns. You may have the enmeshed mother and the disengaged father. It's perfect. And yeah, the question is this. What if you have two ACA parents? You got the whole thing in spades, essentially. And it's real hard because there's tight collusion and very similar terror. And usually the defenses are very complementary. So you have a hysterical, dramatic wife and an obsessive husband. It's perfect. Okay? It's a tight system. Okay? Again, I think the root in is that is cognition and observation.
I wrote in great big letters, no wonder I drank. I feel like a medical student who's catching all the diseases you're talking about. Oh, God. Yeah.
Do you see will you see a couple separately and the family?
You know what I find generally, I've been doing family therapy for a long time, seldom is it anybody but the couple. the couple is most often the locus of pathology.
Yeah.
And that once you start to monkey with the system a little bit, the kid's symptoms clear up, or they're homeostatic symptoms. So basically what you want to do is put them over here, monkey with that marriage a little bit, watch what happens, and things will clean up pretty quickly.
So what you're saying is you'll start off seeing them as a family unit,
Yeah.
and then sometimes...
Yeah, I always start off assessing the entire family because I want to know the role the kids play.
Yeah.
I want to watch those kids. I want to see how functional or dysfunctional they are. Sometimes they're real dysfunctional. If you've got real crazy kids, you've got to do something else.
Do you ever see the couple separately, though?
Yes, I will see the couple separately. What I tend to do is I'll see the family for a minimum of 3 to 5 assessment sessions. Take a look at family patterns and give the family enough observational tasks and family tests to take home that I start to create some structural change. If I see it clean up pretty rapidly, I know where to go. If it doesn't, then I may choose to work longer with the whole system or pull various subsystems out. I may work with the siblings for a couple of sessions. I may work with father and son. I may work with mother and the enmeshed daughter. I mean, whatever it is, whatever it takes to start creating that kind of change. Yeah.
You assume that a symptomatic kid is always a sign of symptomatic marriage. In other words, can kids have problems that don't have to do with mom?
Is that a real question, or is
It
it?
really is.
Okay.
Yeah.
The question is this.
I did thinking about
Yeah.
it, but I'm
Are there just symptomatic kids? I have seen symptomatic kids who are having what I really see as sort of adjustment reactions to changes in the developmental life cycle. Those kind of symptoms will usually clear up 6 months or so following, 3 to 6 months following the change. Okay? The symptoms I'm talking about are symptoms that seem to have a more chronic kind of flavor to them. And I'll assess it. I mean, I'm delighted to see families like that. Every so often, real healthy families come into you. They're terrific people. The kid has... The rules need a little changing in the family. The marriage is in pretty good shape. They don't want to monkey with the marriage. It's pretty good. I don't think it's always the marriage. It may be family rules that are dysfunctional. Okay? And then it may be developmental stuff that we're going to work on.
Well, what about personality predisposition?
Oh, of course. I mean, however, I got to tell you, I have never seen characterologically disturbed youngsters come from healthy marriages. I don't think it happens. I don't think it happens.
I would question that.
I have never seen borderlines, for instance, come from loving, supportive, healthy relationships. I think that's it defies the definition, because on some level what we're talking about is levels of abuse and boundary disturbances that don't happen in healthy marriages.
I'm thinking about like an oppositional personality, or some kid who has trouble with irrational authority with teachers.
I'm hearing the train of thought. I'll tell you one of the places I get concerned. Sometimes you'll have healthy marriages, rather intact families, but you have had major trauma to the family that interrupted what was ordinarily supportive parenting. You'll have a physiological condition or a neurological difficulty that exacerbates some kind of learning. Some interruption, some strange happening that one wouldn't ordinarily predict. But if you look at healthy parenting and a healthy couple over a long period of time, one should expect, barring bizarre occurrences, rather healthy youngsters, if the fit's been good. And you know the whole notion now is about fit.
Well, yeah.
You know the whole idea of fit? And all through the whole eco-psychology community, we're talking now about fit. I mean, does the parental coalition match up well with the kid?
Yeah.
If it doesn't, you could have a really healthy marriage that doesn't work well, real healthy parents that don't work well with that kid.
Yeah.
They supply a different kind of structures than the kid needs. So anyhow,
Okay.
yes.
Yes, I have two questions. One of them is, what are some of your observational tasks with families?
Mm-hmm.
And the other one is, how do you go about helping the family start to build trust, and the trust within the marriage and within the family?
Good question. Two questions. What observational tasks? What do you have them look for? And secondarily, how do you begin to build trust? I'll start with the simpler question. Simpler questions about observational tasks. Mom's angry at me all the time. She really never lets me do anything I want to do. I want you to watch when Mom is angry. How often is she really angry? How often does she let you do what you want? How many times last week did you get to do what you want? How many times did she stop you? Susan is never warm with me. I want you to observe when she seems warm, when she doesn't seem warm, and how you respond to it. Just watch it. Watch the warmth in the relationship. She's always trying to control me. Watch it. Watch when she controls you. How does it look? How do you feel? What it does is it doesn't deny perceptions. It says, watch. When does it happen? How does it happen? And how do you feel? And what begins to happen is when they bring that material in, whether they've written it or just thought it, one, they've distanced themselves on the process. I've trained them to observe. And secondly, they come in and they'll say, I think you were trying to control me when. And the other person will go, oh, yeah, because blah, blah, blah. Or, I can't remember what you're talking about. Or, gee, you know what? I was just scared then. Or, I just got annoyed with you. Or, you know, I just didn't want to do anything. You didn't give me any help. No, I was just trying to stay out of your way. Oh. So it really begins to teach them to read cues properly. Okay? So anything that's going on in the family that the family's worried about, I train them to watch. Okay? I also trained this man to watch stuff about success and failure. When did he have those feelings? And what did he do about it? He had the feelings whenever a big deal closed. Okay? And he went to work more when he succeeded. He watched that and he said, that's very strange. Well, of course, it's all very strange. What you want to do is show them how very strange it is. Okay? Don't pick things that are going to really terrify them. Don't have them start to look at things like intimacy real quick. Okay? Good. Next question, trust. The starting place to me is to admit that you don't. And to make that all right. And to validate that that's not crazy, wrong, inappropriate, or unloving. That trust is built and earned. And that I don't expect it to be in every family just because one thinks it should be. ACAs are real big on guiding principles of what should go on in families, and they're really feeling badly that they don't feel some of those feelings. They shouldn't feel those feelings. They have no reason to. And so that's where I start. And I start by having them look at and identify who they trust and why. Maybe nothing. That's okay too. And I think from just being able to say, I can't and I don't, and I have reasons, it validates their sanity enough that they begin to trust me and themselves. Distrust comes out of the inability to trust one's own perceptions, period. When you start to be able to trust and validate your own perceptions, the thing shifts. Okay?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I was wondering, in your work with couples, do you work with individuals?
It's tricky work. I come from a school of family therapy that believes that you pragmatically do what you have to do, and I very often will see that the locus of pathology may be in one parent or the other, or that in order for family sessions to continue, mother's depression or dad's denial has got to be dealt with on some level, or rapport building or trust building has to go on with that particular partner. So I may pull them out. I work often with a co-therapist, and what I like to do is work with our families together so that we work as a co-therapist team. And if I'm going to see the father, she may see the mother. I don't like to see everybody individually. That's just too confusing. I like to have the co-therapist do that work. So one, it's a male-female team, so we get all that mother-father transference material. And if they don't trust their father, they might trust their mother. It shows them healthy, relatively healthy male-female functioning together. And that when it's not, I also like to show that. When we're having trouble, we talk about that in sessions and things like that. So they get a sense that male-female couples can work together and do that kind of work and share. Okay?
Can I ask one more question? Do you have any books out on this?
I'm not writing yet. I'm still doing it. So one day. I'm teaching it, not writing it yet. Yeah.
You talked about the parents being, or the partners being good parents, and then you also talked about them being pals.
Yeah.
What do you mean, friends?
They'll be friends. They can be friends. They're oftentimes not a bad sociocultural fit. Okay? They'll often be good acquaintances, good pals. They get along okay. They go to the same bridge club. They both play tennis. There's a superficial alliance, which also works for these families because it creates a kind of bonding that makes the families tolerable. Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, they just play together.
They do things together.
Yeah, very good.
Okay. They may play together. I'm not always sure of that. Okay. Sometimes ACAs are afraid to play. Yeah.
Can you talk about interventions that you would use to deal with like the lack of sexual intimacy and fear?
Good question. Sexual intimacy. So often I found in the histories, the questions about sexual intimacy, what kind of interventions would you make in terms of the problems with sexual intimacy? One, I don't always find that problem, by the way. For some reason, some people come out of awful households with that intact. Isn't that nice? Okay. It may be based on some distance in the relationship. It may be based on some abusive kind of things that go on between the couple, etc. I don't know. When it is not an existing dynamic between them, and sometimes I do find that, I don't touch it early. I make it real okay for them to be as distant as they are with each other, because I find it's very dangerous to go in with some kind of preconceived expectation about how much intimacy somebody ought to be able to enjoy. And many of these men and women feel guilty about not exploring their sexuality anyhow. They already feel bad. So I leave that until I ask questions about it, we see where they are with it, and as I find the barriers of mistrust going down, you'll find increased interest, first in affection, in dialogue, and then in sexuality. So many of them have had molestation experiences or abuse experiences that their sexuality is very often tied up with all that material. So of course they're shut down in some way. And that's an embarrassment, and it's uncomfortable, and there's a lot of long-standing issues with it in the relationship. I make it real okay that hasn't happened, and I explain. This man said to me, I don't understand why I haven't wanted to touch her. I said, you don't want her to touch you. You don't want to get close to her yet. I wouldn't either. I think she's scary to you. I think she's a lot like your mother was for you, and that's real scary. Why would you want to do that? And it was like, oh, the idea that you wouldn't want to have sex with someone or make love to someone you didn't feel intimate with didn't occur. Sex is something that one does. One is supposed to. It's another obligation in a relationship. And these people have not used their bodies as vehicles for intimacy. They've used their bodies because they're supposed to do that. Well, we all know that when you're supposed to do that, it doesn't stay very interesting very long. Okay? Other questions? Yes?
If you have someone come in who refuses to come in with a family, say a couple, and you have to treat individually, would you do that? Would you choose to do that?
Yeah, I do choose to do that. Yeah, there's some rules and systems there that I think are real interesting. I mean, one is wholeness, and that you can take any part of that system and begin to affect change in it. Now, the problem with that is the homeostatic mechanism in the family is stronger than any one single therapist can be. But if you equip an older adolescent with some observational skills, some communication skills, a sense of his history, and some ability to confront the system, even if he cannot affect change in it, he may be able to disengage from it, separate from it, and create change on his own. So I don't have a problem with that. Or you've got a wife or a husband who essentially is headed for dissolution because they simply cannot tolerate. They dance near the pit, partner can't do it, and they have to go. That's okay. And sometimes we're about sitting with that partner while they grieve, and they go. That's okay with me. Other questions?
Just a
comment on what the lady in front said about whether or not children with characterological disorders can come out of functional families. Sometimes I find that if I probe deeply, the difficulty in the family occurred in the first couple of years.
Yeah.
And the patient doesn't remember it at all.
Good comment.
And, and I pick up I have one patient right now where I picked up some very severe stuff where the mother had a brain tumor and was in and out of mental hospital.
Yeah.
He had no recollection of it all.
Yeah, and that's a point well taken, because when we look at structural damage like that, it had to have occurred early. And sometimes a family, I had a man come in, a real high-functioning borderline man, and his mother was willing to come in treatment. Her mother was lovely, I mean, a wonderful, warm, caring, involved, appropriate boundaries, a nice life of her own. She had polio when he was a year old. There had been no one else to take care of him. She'd been a single mother. He had really been neglected by caretakers and abused by them. It wasn't her fault. The mother was fine. Something happened. When you see that kind of structural damage, something happened. It may not be the parent's fault, responsibility, or in anybody's awareness that anything happened, but something happened. Okay? Good. Was this what you thought you were going to get? I mean, is this what about? Oh, okay. Go on, keep doing the good work.
We hope you enjoyed this recording. Please check out our website at www.sobrietytalks.com. Thank you.